Picture this. You're 7 months pregnant, sitting at an elegant Manhattan dinner party, watching your millionaire husband publicly caress another woman's hand. What would you do? Stay silent, make a scene, leave quietly? Rebecca Sterling did something no one expected. She pulled out her phone, went live to thousands of viewers, and calmly asked her husband to tell everyone about the house he'd secretly bought for his mistress with company money. What happened next shocked the business world, destroyed a multi-million-dollar empire, and turned one pregnant woman into a viral sensation overnight. This isn't just a story about infidelity. This is about a woman who discovered her husband's crimes, chose truth over comfort, and live-streamed justice to the world. By the end of this 90-minute story, you'll witness a corporate takedown, a public divorce, federal arrests, and the birth of a movement that inspired women worldwide. You'll see how one moment of courage can change everything. This is the true story of the live stream that broke the internet and rebuilt a life. The phone buzzed against the marble countertop like an angry wasp trapped under glass. Rebecca Sterling stared at the screen, her husband's name glowing in cold blue letters against the sleek surface. 7 months pregnant and bone-deep exhausted, she'd been hoping for a quiet evening at home, maybe ordering takeout and watching something mindless on television. Instead, Usauman, the text message made her blood freeze in her veins. Board dinner tonight. Sophia will be there. You'll sit quietly and watch. Consider it your final wifely duty. Rebecca's hands started shaking uncontrollably. She pressed them against her thighs, trying to still the tremor. It was the same gesture she'd made in every high-stakes meeting at her old marketing firm, a physical anchor when the world felt like it was spinning too fast. The habit had followed her from boardroom to living room, a reminder of the woman she used to be before she became Mrs. Jonathan Sterling. Final wifely duty. The words echoed in her mind like a death sentence, each syllable cutting deeper than the last. She stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of their Manhattan penthouse, watching Central Park stretch out below like a green carpet dotted with tiny people living their tiny lives. Her reflection stared back from the glass, superimposed over the city. Designer maternity dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Swollen ankles hidden by expensive Italian shoes. Dark circles under hazel eyes that had once sparkled with ambition and dreams of partnership. The pregnancy test results were supposed to be private. That's what she told herself 3 weeks ago when she discovered Jonathan's affair with Sophia Williams, his head of investor relations. A woman 6 years younger with perfect skin and no stretch marks, no swollen breasts, no morning sickness that lasted all day. Rebecca had stayed silent about the affair, hoping against hope that he'd come to his senses, that the man she'd married was still somewhere inside the stranger he'd become. Instead, he'd grown bolder, crueler, more confident in his cruelty. Her phone buzzed again, another message cutting through her thoughts like a knife. This time it was from Jonathan's mother, Margaret Sterling, the iron-willed matriarch of old Manhattan money. "Darling, you look tired in the photos from last week's charity gala. Perhaps you should stay home tonight and rest." Even Margaret knew. The humiliation cut deeper than the betrayal itself, settling in her chest like a physical weight. Everyone in their social circle knew about Jonathan's affair except Rebecca, the naive pregnant wife still playing house, while her husband paraded his mistress around Manhattan. Rebecca's hand moved instinctively to her belly, where their unborn daughter kicked and squirmed. At 32, this was supposed to be her moment of triumph, the family she'd dreamed of since childhood, the partnership she'd believed in when she gave up her successful marketing career to support Jonathan's fledgling tech company, pouring her own savings and client contacts into Sterling Tech's foundation. "We're going to be okay," she whispered to her unborn child, her voice barely audible in the cavernous living room. "Mama's going to figure this out." The apartment door slammed with the force of a gunshot, the sound echoing through their marble foyer. Jonathan's voice carried through the space, sharp and commanding, the same tone he used with subordinates who disappointed him. "Rebecca, where are you?" She turned slowly, deliberately, watching her husband stride into their living room like he owned everything in it, which, legally speaking, he did. At 38, Jonathan Sterling still commanded attention wherever he went. 6 feet tall, with silver threading through dark hair, wearing a bespoke suit that cost more than her first car. The same man who'd swept her off her feet 4 years ago with weekend trips to Paris and passionate promises of partnership in everything. "You got my message," he said without preamble. His tone was matter-of-fact, like he was discussing quarterly earnings or restaurant reservations. "I'm not going to sit there and watch you humiliate me publicly." Rebecca's voice was steadier than she felt, drawing on years of client presentations and board meetings. Jonathan stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne. Tom Ford Oud Wood, the same scent he'd worn on their first date. The smell used to make her heart race with anticipation. Now it made her stomach turn with revulsion. "You'll do exactly what I tell you to do." His voice was calm, controlled, carrying the quiet authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed without question. "The board needs to see stability, a united front. After tonight, we can discuss arrangements for the future." Arrangements? The word tasted bitter on her tongue, like medicine or betrayal. "Divorce, custody agreements, your financial future." He checked his Rolex, a gesture so familiar it felt scripted, performed for an audience of one. "Sophia understands what I need in a partner at this stage of my career. You've become inconvenient." The baby kicked harder, as if protesting on her behalf. Rebecca closed her eyes, trying to process the casual cruelty of his words. Inconvenient, like a scheduling conflict or a budget shortfall. When she opened her eyes, something had shifted inside her chest. A decision crystallized like ice forming on glass, beautiful and sharp and dangerous. "Fine," she said, her voice carrying a new note he didn't recognize. "I'll be there." Jonathan's smile was the same one that had once made her believe in fairy tales and happy endings. "Good. Car leaves at 7 sharp." As his footsteps faded toward his home office, Rebecca pulled out her laptop with hands that no longer shook. Her fingers flew across the keyboard with muscle memory from her marketing days. The skills might be rusty from disuse, but social media knowledge stayed sharp. She still had administrative access to Sterling Tech's corporate accounts from her consulting days. Jonathan had never bothered to revoke her permissions, probably forgot she had them. She opened her personal Livestream app first, the one connected to her dormant but not deleted professional accounts. 10,000 followers from her old marketing network. People who remembered Rebecca Matthews, the strategic communications executive who'd built campaigns that won industry awards and changed market dynamics. Then she opened Sterling Tech's official social media dashboard, her heart pounding as the familiar interface loaded. 50,000 followers across platforms. Clients, investors, employees, competitors, journalists. Everyone who mattered in their industry. Everyone who shaped opinions and moved markets. Tonight would indeed change everything. But not the way Jonathan expected. Rebecca stood and walked to her walk-in closet, selecting her outfit with the precision of a general preparing for battle. Navy blue maternity dress that photographed beautifully under restaurant lighting, pearls that had belonged to her grandmother, a woman who'd survived the Great Depression and 2 world wars, low heels that wouldn't slip on marble floors or betray her with an unsteady step. She was dressing for the performance of her lifetime, and every detail mattered. In the ensuite bathroom, Rebecca applied makeup with careful precision, foundation to even her complexion, concealer for the dark circles that spoke of sleepless nights and constant stress, mascara that wouldn't run if she cried, lipstick in a shade called Power Red that would photograph well under any lighting conditions. The woman in the mirror looked polished, professional, completely in control. Only Rebecca knew that underneath the perfect exterior, her heart was hammering against her ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. Her phone chimed with a text from Emma Thompson, her former business partner and closest friend. "Coffee tomorrow? Need to catch up properly." Rebecca typed back quickly. "Rain check? Big plans tonight. We'll call you later." Emma's response was immediate. "Everything okay? You sound different." Rebecca stared at the message for a long moment before responding. "Everything's about to be perfect." She set the phone aside and took one last look in the mirror. Tonight she would stop being the woman who stayed silent for the sake of peace. Tonight she would remember who she used to be before she became someone else's wife. The old Rebecca Matthews had built a career on understanding audiences, crafting messages that move people to action, creating campaigns that change minds and open wallets. She'd forgotten that woman existed, buried her under years of being told she was too much or too intense or too ambitious for a wife. But that woman was still there, just waiting for the right moment to emerge. Rebecca Sterling was about to have her final performance. Tomorrow, Rebecca Matthews would be reborn. The Tesla glided through Manhattan's evening traffic like a shark through dark water, its electric motor silent as death. Rebecca sat in the back seat, watching the city blur past tinted windows that transformed everything into impressionist paintings of light and shadow. The leather seats felt cold against her back, despite the car's perfect climate control. Jonathan sat in the front passenger seat, adjusting his tie in the reflection of his phone screen. His driver, Marcus, had been with the family for 3 years, witness to countless arguments and reconciliations that had slowly eroded into cold politeness. Tonight, Marcus kept his eyes carefully on the road, pretending not to notice the tension crackling between his passengers. Rebecca's phone was warm in her palm, the Livestream app glowing softly like a weapon waiting to be fired. She'd tested the connection twice before leaving the apartment. Video quality was crystal clear. Audio picked up every whispered conversation. The camera angle captured both her face and the space around her perfectly. "Remember what I said?" Jonathan spoke without turning around, his voice carrying the casual authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "You sit quietly. You smile when appropriate. You keep your mouth shut unless directly addressed." "Of course," Rebecca replied, her voice honey-sweet and completely controlled. It was the same tone she'd used during difficult client presentations, when she needed to appear compliant while maneuvering for strategic advantage. "Whatever you think is best, darling." The Mandarin Oriental rose before them like a monument to wealth and power, its windows glowing gold against the darkening sky. The private dining room they were heading to occupied the 52nd floor, with views that made Manhattan look like a glittering toy set spread out for the amusement of the wealthy. Rebecca had attended dozens of these monthly board dinners in the early days of their marriage, back when she was still seen as an asset rather than an inconvenience. Back when Jonathan introduced her as "my brilliant wife," the marketing genius behind our early success, instead of just "my wife," in a tone that suggested she was decorative furniture. Her pregnancy had given him the excuse he'd been looking for to exclude her from business functions. "You need your rest," he'd say with false concern. "These dinners run late, and you know how tired you get." As if pregnancy had somehow damaged her brain along with her waistline. Tonight felt different from the moment they stepped into the elevator. The air hummed with possibility, electric with potential for change. Rebecca checked her phone one more time. Emma's text from earlier still glowed on her screen. "You sure about this? Legal department says it could backfire spectacularly." Rebecca had responded with a single word that felt like a battle cry. "Trust me." The elevator ride to the 52nd floor stretched endless, each floor ticking by like seconds on a countdown timer. Rebecca's reflection multiplied in the mirrored walls, creating an army of pregnant women in navy dresses, all of them carrying the same secret weapon in their perfectly manicured hands. 7 months pregnant. Glowing, people said, though she felt more like a bomb with a lit fuse, counting down to an explosion that would reshape everything. The private dining room buzzed with familiar voices when they arrived, the sound of money and power making small talk over expensive wine. Sterling Tech's board of directors mingled with department heads and major investors. The same crowd that had celebrated her marketing victories in the company's early days, before she became invisible. And there, standing at the marble bar like she belonged there, stood Sophia Williams. Rebecca had studied photos of her, of course. Social media made stalking remarkably easy these days. But seeing Sophia in person hit differently than pixels on a screen. 26 years old, wearing a red dress that hugged curves Rebecca remembered having before pregnancy, changed her body. Perfect makeup applied with professional skill. Perfect hair that caught the light just right. Perfect everything, really. The sight should have devastated her. Instead, it sharpened her focus to a razor's edge. Margaret Sterling approached first, her smile brittle as winter ice and twice as cold. Jonathan's mother had never quite approved of Rebecca, considering her too middle class for the Sterling family name, despite her professional success. "Rebecca, dear, you look absolutely radiant tonight." Her air kiss missed by several inches, probably to avoid smudging her own perfect lipstick. Though perhaps you should be home resting, pregnancy can be so taxing. I wouldn't miss tonight for the world, Rebecca replied with genuine warmth. It's such an important evening for the company. David Walsh, the board chairman, took her elbow gently as Margaret drifted away. His concern seemed genuine, different from the polite inquiries of others who saw her as Jonathan's pregnant accessory. How are you feeling tonight, really? He asked quietly, his eyes searching her face with unexpected intensity. Something in his tone made Rebecca study his weathered features more carefully. David had always been kind to her, one of the few board members who remembered her contributions to the company's early success. Tonight, his eyes held worry that went deeper than social politeness. I'm feeling quite well, actually, she said truthfully. Better than I have in weeks. He pressed a business card into her palm, his fingers lingering for just a moment. His personal number was written on the back in blue ink, the handwriting careful and precise. If you need anything at all, he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the cocktail party chatter. Day or night, don't hesitate. The dinner seating arrangement was strategic torture, carefully orchestrated to maximize her humiliation. Rebecca found her name card placed between Thomas Brennan, Sterling Tech's longest-serving board member, and Dr. Patricia Moore, her obstetrician who also served on the hospital board that received Jonathan's generous donations. Across the table, Jonathan sat beside Sophia like they were already a couple. The positioning wasn't accidental. Nothing about tonight was accidental. Rebecca smoothed her napkin across her lap 3 times, the same nervous habit from her first board presentation 5 years ago. Some behaviors never changed, no matter how much else transformed around them. Wine was poured into crystal glasses that caught the candlelight like liquid fire. Rebecca accepted sparkling water with lime, the same drink she'd been ordering for 7 months. The conversation swirled around quarterly projections and market expansion plans, familiar territory that felt both comforting and distant. Normal, civilized. She could almost pretend this was just another dinner, another night in their carefully constructed life. Then Jonathan's hand moved to cover Sophia's on the white tablecloth. The gesture was subtle, intimate, unmistakably romantic. Several people noticed, conversations faltering for half beats before resuming with forced normalcy. Rebecca felt every eye in the room trying not to look at her, the pregnant wife watching her husband caress another woman's hand. She reached for her phone with steady fingers, positioning it carefully beside her water glass. The camera captured both their faces in profile, the lighting perfect for streaming. She opened the Livestream app and watched as viewers began appearing immediately. 3 people became 10. 10 became 50 as notifications reached her old professional network. 50 became 200 as shares and forwards spread the word that Rebecca Sterling was broadcasting live from what looked like an elegant dinner party. Her thumb hovered over the second button, the one that would connect the feed to Sterling Tech's official social media accounts. 50,000 followers who trusted the company's communications. Clients who had invested millions in Jonathan's vision. Employees who depended on their paychecks and stock options. Once she pressed that button, there would be no going back. The careful facade they'd all maintained would shatter like expensive crystal hitting marble floors. Jonathan stood, raising his wine glass with practiced ease. The room quieted automatically, all attention turning to the head of the table, where he commanded the space like a conductor before an orchestra. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to propose a toast tonight. The familiar ritual of his monthly speeches, his moment to shine in front of the people whose opinions mattered most. Rebecca had watched him perform this scene dozens of times, had felt proud of his confidence and charisma. To Sterling Tech's continued success in the coming quarter, and to the people who make that success possible. His gaze found Rebecca's across the table, and she saw the challenge there, the subtle cruelty. He wanted her to see this moment, to understand her place in his new world order. The discarded wife sitting quietly while he moved on to his next chapter. Rebecca smiled serenely and pressed the second button. The viewer count jumped from 200 to 800 in seconds. 800 to 2,000 as Sterling Tech's official live stream began broadcasting to their entire network of stakeholders. Jonathan's free hand came to rest on Sophia's shoulder as he continued his toast, the intimate gesture now being watched by thousands of people who had no idea they were witnessing the end of a marriage and possibly the beginning of a corporate scandal. The show was about to begin, and Rebecca Sterling held the remote control. The live stream counter climbed like a rocket, ascending into space, each number representing another witness to what was about to unfold. 2,000 viewers became 3,000, then 5,000, as the feed spread across social media platforms with the viral intensity that only genuine drama could achieve. Rebecca kept her expression perfectly serene, while her heart hammered against her ribs like a prisoner demanding freedom. Her old marketing network was sharing the stream rapidly, adding comments and speculation that drew even more viewers. The Sterling Tech corporate feed was pulling in clients and investors from around the globe, people logging in to see what the company's official account was broadcasting at what should have been a private dinner. Jonathan's speech grew more intimate with each carefully chosen word, his performance polished by years of practice in front of influential audiences. "Success in our industry requires true partnership," he said, his voice carrying the warm authority that had made him a sought-after speaker at conferences. "Trust between colleagues, the courage to embrace change when circumstances evolve beyond our original plans." His fingers traced along Sophia's wrist in full view of the camera, the gesture so tender it made Rebecca's stomach turn. Several board members shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, wine glasses pausing halfway to lips as they began to sense the undercurrents in the room. Margaret Sterling's smile looked like it might crack her carefully maintained facade. Rebecca felt the recognition hit her like ice water thrown in her face. This wasn't just Jonathan flaunting his affair for her benefit. He was publicly transitioning from wife to mistress, using Rebecca as a prop in his carefully orchestrated narrative. The pregnant wife, sitting quietly and obediently while he moved on to his next chapter with the approval of their social circle. The realization should have destroyed her. Instead, it crystallized her resolve into something diamond-hard and equally cutting. "What beautiful words, Jonathan," Rebecca said, her voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet room. "Why don't you tell everyone about the partnership that originally created Sterling Tech?" The conversation didn't just pause, it died completely. Forks stopped halfway to mouths. Wine glasses hung suspended in midair. The only sound was the soft clink of expensive jewelry as people turned to stare at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to horror. Jonathan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the only sign that her interruption wasn't part of his carefully scripted evening. His recovery was smooth and practiced, years of media training evident in the way he maintained his composure. "Of course, darling." The endearment sounded forced now, artificial. Rebecca's marketing expertise in our early days was quite valuable to the company's foundation. Just valuable? Rebecca's smile never wavered, though her eyes held a new intensity that several people noticed. The live stream viewer count hit 8,000, comments pouring in from former colleagues, current friends, and complete strangers drawn by the unfolding drama. "I seem to remember my entire client database funding our first office lease, my personal savings account covering payroll when we couldn't make payments during those crucial first 6 months." David Walsh leaned forward slightly, his weathered face showing sudden interest. Other board members exchanged glances that spoke volumes about information they'd never heard before. This was company history that had been carefully edited in official narratives. Thomas Brennan's eyebrows rose in surprise. Dr. Moore set down her wine glass with deliberate care. Even Sophia looked uncomfortable, perhaps beginning to understand that she was caught in something larger than a simple affair. "Ancient history," Jonathan laughed, but there was steel underneath the humor now. "We all make sacrifices for success in the startup world." Rebecca understood that investments of time and money were necessary. Rebecca's hand moved instinctively to her belly, where their daughter was kicking with unusual vigor. The protective gesture was universal, instantly recognizable to every mother watching the stream. The movement was captured perfectly by the camera angle she'd calculated. "Indeed, we do make sacrifices," she agreed, her voice carrying a note of sadness that made several people lean closer. Some more than others, apparently. She stood carefully, one hand on the table for balance, the other remaining protectively over her unborn child. The simple movement commanded attention, made her the focal point of every eye in the room. "Would you excuse me for just a moment?" she asked with perfect politeness. "The baby seems to be pressing on my bladder quite insistently." Polite chuckles rippled around the table, the kind of understanding laughter that pregnant women receive from strangers who remember their own experiences. Jonathan's relief was visible in the way his shoulders dropped slightly, probably thinking he had avoided whatever confrontation he had sensed building. In the ladies' room, Rebecca checked her phone with hands that trembled only slightly. The main live stream had 12,000 viewers and climbing. Sterling Tech's official stream showed 18,000 people watching what they thought was a corporate dinner. Screenshots were already flooding social media platforms, news outlets picking up the story in real time. Emma's text came rapid fire, her excitement and terror evident in the broken syntax. Holy shit, this is everywhere. Number 2 trending topic nationally. You beautiful genius, what have you done? Legal says document everything. I'm recording from my end just in case. Rebecca reapplied her lipstick with steady hands, the same shade of power red she'd chosen for its staying power and photogenic qualities. The woman in the mirror looked different now, determined, dangerous, ready for whatever came next. She stood in the bathroom's marble silence for 2 full minutes, hands pressed against the counter, breathing deeply and evenly. The baby moved restlessly inside her, and she whispered soothing words she didn't entirely believe herself. Mama's got this, little one. Mama's got this, and tomorrow we'll be free. When she returned to the dining room, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Conversations were stilted, artificial, with too many people checking their phones and whispering to their neighbors. Sophia looked pale despite her professional makeup, her earlier confidence clearly shaken. Several board members wore expressions of barely concealed concern. Rebecca took her seat gracefully, arranging her napkin with the same precision she'd used for everything else tonight. I'm so sorry for the interruption, she said with genuine warmth. Where were we in the conversation? Jonathan was telling us about the new investor relations strategy, Thomas Brennan said carefully, his tone suggesting he was choosing words with unusual care. Ah, yes, of course. Rebecca's voice carried nothing but polite interest. Sophia's department. Tell me, Sophia, how long have you been working closely with my husband? The question hung in the air like smoke from an expensive cigar, visible and choking. Sophia's face flushed red above her carefully chosen dress, the color clashing with the fabric in a way that would photograph terribly. 6 months, she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. 6 months. Rebecca nodded thoughtfully, as if processing new information rather than confirming what she already knew. That's such interesting timing. Our marriage counselor will want to note that in her records, the affair began right around the time I started showing. The words dropped into the silence like stones into still water, ripples spreading outward as their meaning hit each person at the table. Someone's breath caught audibly. Margaret Sterling's teacup rattled against its saucer. I trusted my instincts about this. I was right all along. Jonathan's careful control cracked visibly, his composure slipping like a mask coming loose. Rebecca, this isn't the appropriate venue for discussing marriage? Her laugh was musical, genuinely amused rather than bitter. But darling, you made it the appropriate venue when you sat me here to watch you caress another woman's hand in front of our colleagues and investors. The live stream exploded with activity. Viewer count hit 25,000 and was still climbing. Comments ranged from outrage to admiration to shock. The conversation moving so fast it was impossible to read individual messages. The story was spreading beyond their industry into mainstream social media, picked up by influencers and news aggregators who sensed something significant happening. Margaret Sterling stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. Perhaps we should postpone the business discussion portion of our evening. Please don't leave on my account, Rebecca said, remaining seated with the serene composure of a queen holding court. I'm finding this absolutely fascinating. Jonathan, why don't you tell everyone about the house in the Hamptons? The color drained from Jonathan's face so completely he looked like he might faint. The transformation was visible even to the people watching on livestream, comments exploding with speculation about what house she meant and why it had provoked such a reaction. The charming little place you purchased 3 months ago, Rebecca continued conversationally. The one that's registered in Sophia's name, the one our marriage counselor doesn't know about. despite our discussions about transparency and rebuilding trust. The room erupted in whispered conversations that couldn't quite be called discreet. Board members looked between each other with growing alarm, several pulling out phones to make urgent calls or send emergency messages. David Walsh's weathered face had gone grim, his earlier concern now clearly justified. Rebecca smiled serenely at the camera positioned beside her water glass, the angle capturing her profile perfectly. To her 28,000 viewers, she looked like a woman completely in control of a situation that was spiraling beyond anyone else's ability to manage. The night was just beginning, and she held every card in the deck. The private dining room crackled with tension, so thick it seemed to press against the windows overlooking Manhattan's glittering skyline. Rebecca's revelation about the Hamptons' house had shifted the entire dynamic from an awkward social situation to what felt like the opening moves of a corporate crisis that could destroy reputations and reshape the company's future. Board members were no longer pretending to ignore the elephant in the room. They were staring directly at it, calculating damage, and planning responses with the speed that came from years of crisis management experience. Thomas Brennan cleared his throat like a judge calling for order in a chaotic courtroom. Jonathan, perhaps we should discuss these matters privately, away from— There's absolutely nothing to discuss here, Jonathan interrupted, his voice carrying its old authority despite the sweat beading at his hairline. His eyes darted to the live stream counter visible on Rebecca's phone screen, the numbers climbing past 30,000 viewers. Rebecca is obviously having some kind of pregnancy-related episode. The hormones can cause paranoid delusions. Rebecca's mind flashed suddenly to their wedding day 4 years ago, standing in the cathedral where 3 generations of Sterlings had married. Jonathan's vows echoing off stone walls. I promise to honor you, to protect you, to stand by you in all circumstances, to be your partner in all things. The same voice that had spoken those words. The same face that had looked at her with such apparent love. But the man behind them was gone, replaced by the stranger who dismissed her truth as delusion. An episode? Rebecca's laugh was soft and genuinely amused, the sound carrying clearly to every corner of the room. Dr. Moore, you've been monitoring my pregnancy very closely for 7 months now. Have you noticed any concerning tahdidas in my mental health or cognitive function? Her obstetrician shifted uncomfortably in her chair, clearly wishing she was anywhere else in the world. The woman who delivered babies for Manhattan's elite was accustomed to keeping secrets, but this was beyond her usual scope of discretion. Mrs. Sterling, perhaps this isn't the appropriate— Please, doctor, Rebecca interrupted gently but firmly. Your professional opinion as my physician. Am I having a mental health episode that would affect my ability to accurately report events I've witnessed? Doctor. Moore looked between Rebecca and Jonathan like a spectator at a tennis match, then glanced around the table at faces that expected her to provide some kind of medical explanation for the social disaster unfolding before them. You've been under considerable stress during your pregnancy, she said carefully, but your mental state has been consistently stable throughout our appointments. Your cognitive function, memory, and emotional regulation have all been well within normal ranges. Stress, Rebecca nodded slowly, as if considering the word for the first time. Yes, discovering systematic financial fraud can be quite stressful for anyone, pregnant or not. The room went dead silent except for the ambient noise of the city 52 floors below. Even the soft classical music that had been playing through hidden speakers seemed to pause in anticipation. David Walsh leaned forward with the intensity of a man who'd spent 40 years in boardrooms and recognized the moment when everything changed. What specific kind of fraud are we discussing, Rebecca? Oh, did I not mention that detail? Rebecca's voice dripped with the kind of innocence that made several people reach for their phones. Sophia, would you like to explain how investor relations funds were systematically redirected to purchase your house? Or shall I provide the documentation that I've prepared? Sophia's carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the way her face crumbled, like a demolished building. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly, reminding Rebecca of a fish gasping for water. It wasn't supposed to be, she stammered. It wasn't supposed to be fraud because you planned to pay it back. Rebecca finished gently, her tone understanding rather than accusatory. With what money exactly? The additional funds you two have been funneling through the Cayman Islands account that doesn't appear on any official Sterling Tech financial statements? Margaret Sterling's fine bone china teacup rattled against its saucer as she set it down with trembling hands. The sound echoed in the absolute silence, like a gunshot in an empty cathedral, sharp and final and somehow ominous. Jonathan stood so abruptly that his chair toppled backward, hitting the hardwood floor with a crash that made several people jump. His careful composure had finally shattered completely, revealing something desperate and ugly underneath. "That's enough," he shouted, his voice carrying the kind of rage that made people instinctively lean away from him. "You manipulative, vindictive bitch. You planned this entire evening." "I planned to have dinner with my husband's colleagues," Rebecca replied, her voice never rising above conversational level despite the verbal assault. "You planned to humiliate me while systematically stealing from your investors. I think history will judge which of us planned more effectively." The live stream had exploded beyond her wildest calculations. 38,000 viewers and climbing exponentially as the feed spread across every major social media platform. News outlets were already picking up the story, embedding the stream in breaking news articles about corporate fraud and public marriage dissolution. "I am not the problem here. I never was the problem." David Walsh's phone was pressed against his ear, his free hand covering his mouth as he spoke in urgent whispers. Rebecca caught fragments of his conversation. "Emergency board meeting. SEC investigation. Immediate damage control. Containment impossible." Thomas Brennan stood with the gravity of a man about to deliver a verdict. "Jonathan, I think you need to step outside immediately and contact your attorney." "This is my company," Jonathan snarled, his usual polish completely gone. "My board, my investors, my—" Actually, David Walsh ended his call and stood to face the room, his expression grim as a funeral director's. "As of approximately 23 minutes ago, the board voted unanimously in an emergency session to suspend your position pending a full investigation. Building security has been notified and is on their way up." The room erupted like a disturbed beehive. Margaret Sterling swayed in her chair, one hand pressed to her chest as if her heart might stop. Sophia began crying into her napkin with the desperate sobs of someone whose life was disintegrating in real time. Several board members were speaking rapidly into their phones, initiating damage control protocols and emergency response procedures. Through it all, Rebecca sat calmly at the center of the storm, one hand resting protectively on her belly, the other steady on her phone as 42,000 viewers watched an empire crumble in real time. She closed her eyes for 30 seconds, floating in the strange calm that comes after a decision is made and action is taken. The chaos swirled around her, but she felt oddly peaceful, like she was floating in warm water, while a hurricane raged on the surface far above. When she opened her eyes, Jonathan was staring at her with an expression of pure hatred that would have terrified her just hours earlier. Now it simply confirmed that she'd made the right choice. "You've destroyed everything," he said, his voice low and venomous. "Everything we built together. Everything we worked for. Gone." "No," Rebecca said quietly, her words carrying clearly in the relative silence that had fallen over their section of the room. "I've revealed everything that was already broken. There's a significant difference between destruction and exposure." Building security arrived as she spoke, two uniformed men entering with David Walsh, their presence immediately transforming the elegant dining room into something that felt more like a crime scene. The other diners in the restaurant had begun to notice the commotion, phones appearing at other tables as people realized they were witnessing something newsworthy. "Mr. Sterling," so the lead security officer said with professional courtesy, "we need you to come with us immediately." As Jonathan was escorted toward the door, he turned back once, his face a mask of fury and disbelief that made him look like a stranger wearing her husband's features. "This isn't over, Rebecca. You have no idea what you've started tonight." Rebecca smiled with genuine warmth for the first time in months, the expression transforming her face completely. "Actually, darling, I think this is exactly where it ends and something much better begins." The live stream counter hit 46,000 viewers as the door closed behind him with a final satisfying click that seemed to echo through both the dining room and cyberspace. The old Rebecca Sterling was officially dead. What emerged from her ashes would be something entirely new. The private dining room buzzed with the frantic energy of a crisis management center. Voices raised in urgent phone calls and whispered emergency conferences that would determine the fate of a multi-million-dollar company. Rebecca sat in the eye of the hurricane she'd created, watching her carefully orchestrated revelation play out with a precision that surprised even her. Her phone showed 58,000 viewers on the main live stream, with numbers still climbing as the story spread across every conceivable platform. Someone in Sterling Tech's IT department had finally managed to cut the corporate feed, but screenshots, recordings, and video clips were flooding social media with the unstoppable momentum of a digital avalanche. The damage was beautiful, complete, and absolutely irreversible. The rage that filled her wasn't the explosive kind that destroyed everything in its path. Instead, it was cold and calculating, sharp as surgical steel and twice as precise. Years of being dismissed, minimized, pushed aside for the convenience of others, had crystallized into this moment of perfect retribution. Jonathan had called her inconvenient. Tonight, she'd shown him the true meaning of the word. Margaret Sterling approached her table with the careful steps of someone navigating an active minefield, her usual imperious confidence replaced by something that looked almost like fear. "Rebecca, dear," she said, her voice carefully modulated despite the chaos surrounding them. "This has all been quite overwhelming for everyone involved. Perhaps you should go home and rest now?" "Actually, I feel remarkably energetic," Rebecca replied with a radiant smile that seemed to glow from within. "Pregnancy truly does agree with me, especially when I'm not constantly stressed about my husband's criminal activities." Margaret's face went through several shades of pale before settling on something approaching gray. "The family attorneys will need to speak with you as soon as possible." "Of course they will," Rebecca agreed pleasantly. "I've already retained James Mitchell for my representation. I believe you are familiar with his work?" The name hit Margaret like a physical blow. James Mitchell was Manhattan's most ruthless divorce attorney, the man who'd systematically destroyed several prominent families in very public, very expensive proceedings that left his clients wealthy and their opponents financially and socially ruined. David Walsh ended another urgent call and approached their conversation with the grim expression of a man who'd just learned the full scope of a disaster he couldn't control. "Rebecca, I need you to understand that the board had absolutely no knowledge of any financial irregularities," he said, his voice carrying the weight of someone trying to distance himself from a sinking ship. "We were completely in the dark about Jonathan's activities." "I know that, David," she replied with genuine warmth. "That's exactly why I'm sharing this information with all of you through the most transparent medium possible." She gestured toward her phone, where comments continued to stream past faster than anyone could read them. Complete transparency is so important in business relationships, don't you think? Rebecca straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin in a gesture that photographers across the room captured from multiple angles. It was the same power posture she'd perfected during her most challenging client presentations, a physical manifestation of confidence and authority that her audience would recognize instantly. Thomas Brennan rejoined their group, his weathered face etched with lines of stress that seemed to have appeared in the last hour. "The Securities and Exchange Commission has already reached out," he reported grimly. "They want to speak with you as soon as possible, preferably tonight." "I expected they would," Rebecca said calmly, reaching into her purse to withdraw a small USB drive. "I have copies of everything they'll need: bank statements, email correspondences, property records, financial transfer documentation. I've been extremely thorough in my preparation." Several people stared at the innocent-looking device like it contained nuclear launch codes. In a way, it did. Information that could destroy careers, reshape the company, and send people to federal prison. "How long have you known about all of this?" Dr. Moore asked quietly, her medical training making her focus on timelines and causation. "Known about the affair? 3 weeks and 2 days," Rebecca replied with the precision of someone who'd been counting every moment. "Known about the embezzlement?" She paused for dramatic effect, aware that thousands of people were hanging on her every word. "I discovered that yesterday morning when I accessed our joint accounts to begin planning for the baby's financial future. The timeline clicked into place for everyone listening, both in the room and watching online. She'd uncovered systematic financial crimes while her husband was forcing her to publicly witness his adultery. The narrative was devastatingly clear and absolutely damning for Jonathan's character. Emma appeared in the doorway like an avenging angel, having used her emergency contact status to talk her way past building security. Rebecca had given her that access months ago, never imagining she'd need it for something like this. "Becca?" Emma called across the room, her voice cutting through the organized chaos. "I came as soon as I could manage." "Perfect timing as always," Rebecca said, standing carefully and accepting Emma's supportive arm. "Emma Thompson, my former business partner and current closest friend. Emma, please meet Sterling Tech's board of directors." Emma's eyes were wide with a mixture of amazement and terror as she took in the scene around them. She'd been watching the live stream like everyone else in the city, but seeing the aftermath in person was clearly overwhelming. "Are you actually okay?" she whispered, studying Rebecca's face for signs of breakdown or shock. "I'm better than I've been in years," Rebecca said, and meant it completely. The relief of finally telling the truth was intoxicating, like breathing pure oxygen after years of suffocating in lies. "I feel like myself again for the first time since I got married." As they moved toward the door, Thomas Brennan touched her arm gently, his expression conflicted between professional necessity and personal admiration. "Rebecca, you understand that the company will need to officially distance itself from this situation," he said quietly. "But personally speaking, as someone who's known you since the early days, what you've done tonight took incredible courage. I'm not being vindictive. I'm just finished protecting him from the natural consequences of his choices." The elevator ride down felt completely different from the journey up just hours earlier. Emma held her hand while Rebecca watched the city lights blur past the windows, each floor bringing her closer to a freedom she'd forgotten was possible. 71,000 viewers at the peak, Emma reported, checking her own phone. "It's everywhere now. CNN, Fox Business, BBC, every major network has picked up the story. The hashtag is trending in 12 countries." "Good," Rebecca said, her voice firm with a conviction. "Let every person in the world see exactly who Jonathan Sterling really is when he thinks no one important is watching." Her phone buzzed constantly with notifications that she ignored for now. Messages of support from strangers who recognized her courage. Interview requests from journalists who smelled a story that would define careers. Legal advice from attorneys who wanted to represent her. Job offers from competitors who understood her value. But it was the text from James Mitchell that made her smile with genuine satisfaction. Divorce papers filed electronically. Restraining order approved and served. House is legally yours until custody arrangements are finalized. Brilliantly executed. Well played indeed. In the Tesla's back seat, Rebecca finally allowed herself to feel the exhaustion that had been building for months. She leaned against Emma's shoulder while they rode through Central Park, the same route she'd taken as a married woman just hours ago. The baby moved gently inside her as if settling down for sleep after all the excitement. "What happens now?" Emma asked, her voice soft in the leather-scented darkness. Rebecca looked out at the city she'd called home for 8 years, where she'd built a life, lost herself completely, and tonight finally found herself again. "Now we go home," she said, the word home feeling different in her mouth than it had in years. "I make some proper tea, and tomorrow I start rebuilding everything from the ground up." The live stream counter hit 76,000 viewers as they pulled into her building's underground garage, the number still climbing as news outlets embedded the feed in their breaking news coverage. The old Rebecca Sterling was gone forever, dissolved like sugar in water. The woman who emerged from that car was someone entirely new. Someone who'd discovered that sometimes the only way to save yourself is to burn everything down and rise from the ashes. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Rebecca's penthouse felt completely transformed when she returned, though nothing had physically changed in the hours since she'd left. The same imported marble floors gleamed under designer lighting. The same museum-quality furniture occupied precisely the same positions. But the suffocating weight that had pressed down on her for months had lifted completely, replaced by something she'd almost forgotten existed. Hope. Emma helped her out of her heels, the expensive Italian leather shoes that had carried her through the most important performance of her life. The live stream continued in the background, The viewer count still climbing steadily toward 80,000 as late-night social media users discovered the story and shared it with increasingly dramatic commentary. Alone in her bedroom, changing into comfortable silk pajamas that felt like armor being removed after battle, Rebecca finally allowed herself to process the full magnitude of what she'd accomplished. Her hands shook as she hung up the navy maternity dress that had become a costume in the most important theater production of her life. "What if I've made a terrible mistake?" she whispered to her reflection in the full-length mirror, the question emerging from some deep place of doubt she'd kept carefully buried all evening. The baby kicked sharp and insistent against her ribs, as if her unborn daughter was offering an opinion on the matter. Rebecca's hands moved to her belly, feeling the tiny person who would inherit whatever world she created through tonight's choices. "You're absolutely right, little one," she said, her voice growing stronger. "It wasn't a mistake. It was years overdue." Her phone rang with the distinctive tone she'd assigned to unknown numbers, the first of what would undoubtedly be many calls from people she'd never heard of. "Mrs. Sterling, this is Amanda Parker from CNN Business Network. We'd love to offer you an exclusive interview opportunity to tell your side of tonight's events." Three more calls followed in rapid succession: NBC financial correspondent, Fox business producer, Wall Street Journal investigative team. The story had transcended business news and entered the mainstream media cycle, becoming the kind of narrative that captured public imagination and shaped cultural conversations. Emma knocked on the bedroom door with the gentle insistence of someone who knew her well enough to read her moods. "Becca, James Mitchell is here. Says he drove over as soon as he saw the news." Rebecca found her divorce attorney in the living room, laptop open on the coffee table, surrounded by legal documents like a general planning a complex military campaign. At 41, James had distinguished silver threading through dark hair and a reputation that made opposing counsel experience genuine nightmares. "Congratulations," he said without looking up from his screen, fingers flying across the keyboard with the intensity of someone who lived for moments like this. "You've just live-streamed the most expensive divorce in New York legal history." "How expensive are we talking about exactly?" Rebecca asked, settling into her favorite armchair, the one Jonathan had always criticized as too sentimental for their sophisticated aesthetic. "Sterling tech stock dropped 22% in after-hours trading," James reported with obvious satisfaction. "Jonathan's personal net worth took approximately a $60 million hit based on preliminary calculations. Your prenuptial agreement becomes completely void if adultery is proven in conjunction with financial malfeasance." He looked up with the smile of a shark who just spotted wounded prey. "Which you just proved to 79,000 witnesses and counting." Rebecca tucked her feet underneath her in the same position she'd favored during late-night study sessions in college, when the world seemed full of possibilities, and she believed she could accomplish anything she set her mind to. "What about custody arrangements for the baby? Given tonight's evidence of his character, the pending financial crimes investigation, and your documentation of emotional abuse patterns, you'll have full custody with supervised visitation rights only." James's expression grew serious. "Assuming he even wants visitation once the criminal charges are filed." Emma brought tea service on their wedding china, the delicate porcelain painted with roses that had belonged to Jonathan's grandmother. The irony wasn't lost on any of them, using Sterling family heirlooms to celebrate the destruction of Sterling family reputation. "The phone system hasn't stopped ringing," Emma reported. "Journalists, attorneys, 3 different publishers wanting to discuss book deals, and what sounds like every major corporation in America offering you consulting on contracts." "Book deals already?" Rebecca asked, genuinely surprised by the speed of response. James nodded approvingly. "The woman who live-streamed her millionaire husband's corporate downfall while 7 months pregnant? That's a bestseller waiting to happen. Publishers are probably calculating advance offers as we speak." Rebecca's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You don't know what you've started tonight. This won't end the way you think." Then another, equally ominous. "Enjoy your 15 minutes of fame. Some prices are higher than you realize." "Jonathan's already trying to reach you through intermediaries and intimidation," James observed, noting her expression as she read the messages. "I've instructed building security to deny him access to the premises and forwarded the threatening text to law enforcement. He can't intimidate me anymore." I hold every single card in this game now. The live stream chat was flowing like a river in flood season, comments pouring in from around the world faster than human eyes could track. Rebecca watched the digital conversation scroll past, a real-time focus group responding to her story. Queen behavior, this is how you handle cheating. This is what karma looks like when it has good Wi-Fi. How did she stay so calm I would have thrown wine? That baby is going to have the strongest mama ever. Filing for divorce tomorrow because of this woman's example. Sterling tech stock puts just made me rich. Emma laughed, reading over her shoulder with undisguised admiration. You've started a revolution. Twitter is calling it the Sterling scandal, and live stream justice is trending worldwide. At midnight, Rebecca finally ended the live stream after thanking her audience for their support and promising to use her platform responsibly. 87,000 viewers had watched her navigate the aftermath with grace and steel-wrapped in silk determination. She'd answered carefully selected questions, acknowledged supporters by name when possible, and maintained perfect composure throughout. But alone in the nursery, she decorated by herself while Jonathan traveled for business that now seemed suspiciously frequent, surrounded by tiny clothes and stuffed animals that represented dreams she'd held so carefully. Rebecca finally allowed herself to break down completely. She sat in the rocking chair Jonathan had called an unnecessary expense and wept with the kind of tears that came from the deepest places of loss. Not for him, she was surprised to discover she felt nothing but relief about his absence. Not for their marriage, which had been dead longer than she'd wanted to admit, but for the dreams she'd held so carefully, the partnership she'd believed in with religious faith, the family she'd imagined raising in love and honesty and mutual respect. The baby moved restlessly inside her, responding to her emotional state with the sensitivity that connected them even before birth. Rebecca placed both hands on her belly and spoke aloud to her unborn daughter, her voice carrying promises she intended to keep. I'm sorry you won't have the daddy I wanted to give you, little one, but you'll have a mama who fights for what's right instead of what's comfortable. A mama who doesn't accept less than she deserves from anyone. A mama who learned that sometimes burning everything down is the only way to build something better from the ashes. By morning, the hashtag had become a cultural phenomenon that would be studied in business schools and women's studies programs for years to come. Rebecca Sterling had become the face of women who refused to stay silent when staying silent meant protecting people who didn't deserve protection. But first, she needed sleep. Tomorrow, she would begin the complex work of rebuilding her life from the ground up. Tonight, she rested in the knowledge that she'd chosen truth over comfort, justice over convenience, and her daughter's future over her husband's reputation. The baby settled as Rebecca finally relaxed for the first time in months. Even in the womb, her child seemed to understand that Mama had fought for both of them tonight, and that they were going to be just fine. Rebecca woke to brilliant sunlight streaming through her bedroom windows and her phone buzzing with the insistent rhythm of a digital heartbeat that refused to be ignored. 12 hours after her live stream had ended, the story had achieved complete global saturation. The BBC, Reuters, CNN International, every major business network on 6 continents, everyone wanted to know about the pregnant American executive who'd exposed her millionaire husband's crimes in real time. She felt fundamentally different, as if the act of speaking truth had chemically altered her DNA. Lighter, cleaner, like she'd been holding her breath underwater for years and could finally surface into sunshine and breathable air. Emma was already in the kitchen when Rebecca emerged, coffee brewing in the expensive machine Jonathan had insisted they needed. Laptop open to news websites that were covering the story with the kind of attention usually reserved for political scandals or celebrity deaths. Good morning, internet sensation, Emma said, looking up from a screen filled with headlines that used words like explosive and devastating and unprecedented. Please tell me this isn't all some incredibly vivid fever dream, Rebecca replied, pouring fresh orange juice with hands that felt steady for the first time in months. Sterling Tech stock is down 31% and still falling, Emma reported with barely contained glee. Jonathan's been arrested on charges of embezzlement, fraud, and money laundering. Sophia's cooperating fully with federal authorities in exchange for reduced charges. She paused for effect. And you have interview requests from 68 media outlets across 4 continents. Rebecca absorbed this information while preparing her usual breakfast of whole grain toast and Greek yogurt, foods recommended by Dr. Moore for optimal fetal development. Everything felt surreal, like she was living inside someone else's life. What about the board's response? Emergency meeting scheduled for 9 this morning. David Walsh is serving as interim CEO while they conduct a full investigation. Early reports suggest they're distancing themselves from Jonathan as fast as legally and financially possible. Her phone rang with the distinctive tone she'd assigned to important calls. James Mitchell, probably with updates that would shape the next phase of her life. Rebecca, we need to meet immediately. His voice carried the urgency of someone who'd been working through the night. Jonathan's legal team is already making moves. They're claiming you trapped him into making admissions under false pretenses. How exactly can the truth be considered false pretenses? She asked, genuinely curious about the legal gymnastics required for such an argument. It can't be, which is why their strategy won't work, James replied with satisfaction. But they're going to try everything possible to shift blame and minimize his culpability. Can you be in my office by 10? After breakfast, Rebecca showered and dressed with the same military precision she'd used the night before. Black maternity suit that projected authority and competence. Minimal jewelry that wouldn't distract from her words. Hair pulled back in a style that looked professional on camera. She was preparing for battle, and every detail of her appearance would be analyzed and dissected by people looking for weakness. Standing before her full-length mirror, Rebecca adjusted her posture with conscious effort. Shoulders back, chin elevated, hands folded with calm confidence. The same power pose she'd mastered during her most successful client presentations, when she'd convinced Fortune 500 companies to invest millions in campaigns built on her strategic vision. The elevator ride to the lobby felt like descending from a tower into a medieval battlefield. When the doors opened, she faced a wall of reporters, cameras, and microphones that represented every major news organization in the Western Hemisphere. Mrs. Sterling, how do you feel about your husband's arrest? Do you regret the public nature of your revelations? What message do you want to send to other women in similar situations? What's next for you and your baby? Rebecca paused at the center of the media storm, one hand resting protectively on her belly, where her daughter kicked with what felt like approval. Her voice carried clearly across the marble lobby without strain, trained by years of presentations to reach the back row without shouting. I feel relieved that the truth is finally public and that appropriate authorities are investigating the scope of financial crimes, she said, her words chosen with legal precision. I regret waiting so long to act on information I should have reported immediately. As for what's next, my baby and I are looking forward to building an honest future. James Mitchell waited beside a black sedan that looked appropriately serious for the gravity of their situation. Perfectly executed, he said as they pulled away from the media circus. Short, dignified, legally sound, and no inflammatory language that could be taken out of context. The 25-minute ride to his office took them through Manhattan traffic that seemed heavier than usual, as if the entire city had slowed down to process the magnitude of what had happened. Rebecca watched familiar neighborhoods pass by, knowing that her relationship with this city would never be the same. They've hired Kellerman and Associates, James reported, reading updates on his phone. Expensive choice, even for someone with Jonathan's resources. The most expensive defense firm in the country, Rebecca observed. They specialize in destroying whistleblowers' credibility through character assassination. Exactly, but here's their problem. You're not a whistleblower reporting on someone else's company. You're a wife who discovered her husband's criminal activities and refused to participate in covering them up. Rebecca smiled, remembering her strategic thinking from the night before. I covered every legal angle before I pressed the start button. I'm not the naive wife anymore who trusts people to do the right thing without evidence. James looked genuinely impressed, the expression of a professional who recognized superior preparation when he saw it. You planned this with the thoroughness of a military operation. I had an excellent teacher, Rebecca said, her voice soft with irony. Years of watching Jonathan manipulate every situation to his advantage, turn every conversation to his benefit, control every narrative to protect his interests. I learned from the absolute best manipulator I've ever encountered. Her phone buzzed with a text from David Walsh. Board voted unanimously this morning. Jonathan terminated for cause. All benefits forfeited. Your consulting contract reinstated if you want it. We need someone we can trust. Rebecca showed James the message, watching his eyebrows rise in surprise. Sterling Tech wants you back already? Makes perfect strategic sense, she analyzed. I have complete institutional knowledge, public sympathy, and I'm probably the only person who knows where all the financial irregularities are buried. Plus, hiring me sends a message about the company's commitment to transparency. Rebecca walked to the window overlooking Central Park, where she jogged during her first trimester while full of hope for their growing family. The trees were turning brilliant autumn colors, nature's reminder that change could be beautiful even when it meant letting go of what came before. Soon her baby would be born into a completely different world than she'd originally imagined. I want to make a comprehensive public statement, she said finally, turning back to face James with decision written clearly on her face. To the press corps waiting outside, to everyone who's watching, it's time to control the narrative completely. An hour later, Rebecca stood behind a mahogany podium in James Mitchell's conference room, facing a dozen cameras and twice as many reporters representing media outlets from around the globe. Her black suit was perfectly tailored, her makeup applied with professional skill, her voice steady with the conviction of someone who'd found her truth and intended to share it. Yesterday evening, I attended a business dinner with my husband of 4 years, she began, her words carrying the weight of testimony. During that dinner, I learned that his extramarital affair was merely the visible tip of a much larger iceberg of deception, financial crimes, systematic embezzlement, securities fraud that endangered not just our marriage, but the livelihoods of hundreds of employees and the investments of thousands of shareholders. She paused, letting the words settle in the room and across the airwaves where millions of people were watching live coverage. I want to be absolutely clear about something that seems to be causing confusion in some reports, she continued. I didn't set an elaborate trap or engage in entrapment. I simply refused to remain silent while being publicly humiliated. I turned on my phone's camera and let the world see exactly what I was seeing, nothing more and nothing less. A reporter raised her hand with obvious urgency. Do you regret the public nature of your revelation, given the global attention it's received? I regret that public exposure was necessary, Rebecca replied without hesitation. But I don't regret choosing truth over complicity, transparency over protection of criminal behavior. Some situations require sunlight as the best disinfectant. What's next for you professionally, given Sterling Tech's offer? Rebecca's smile was genuine for the first time in months, the expression transforming her face completely. Sterling Tech has offered me a senior consulting position with significant authority to help rebuild the company's reputation and financial integrity. I'm seriously considering accepting. After all, I helped build that company from nothing once before. Perhaps it's time to help build it properly this time. As questions continued for 30 minutes, Rebecca felt her old confidence returning like water filling a long empty well. Not the desperate people-pleasing that had characterized her marriage, but the assured competence that had made her one of the most sought-after marketing executives in the city before she'd given it all up for love. She was exceptional at this kind of performance. She'd simply forgotten how truly good she could be when she wasn't constantly managing someone else's ego and protecting someone else's secrets. Walking back to the sedan through a corridor of cameras and shouted questions, James shook his head with undisguised admiration. You just controlled a hostile international press conference while 7 months pregnant and facing personal crisis. That was absolutely masterful on every level. I've had extensive practice dealing with hostile audiences who wanted to undermine my credibility, Rebecca replied. Jonathan provided excellent training for exactly this situation. As they drove through the city that would now forever be the place where she'd reclaimed her power, Rebecca's phone buzzed constantly with notifications she'd review later. Job offers from companies that wanted to associate with her story. Interview requests from journalists who understood this was a career-defining story. Speaking opportunities from organizations that recognized her as a symbol of something larger than one woman's divorce. But it was the text from Dr. Moore that made her smile with deep satisfaction. Saw the press conference coverage. Your blood pressure and the baby's heartbeat were both perfect at yesterday's appointment. Whatever you're doing for stress management, keep it up. You're absolutely radiant. Rebecca touched her belly gently, feeling her daughter move in response. Hear that, little one? Mama and baby are both thriving when we live in truth instead of lies. For the first time in months, the future felt full of possibility instead of dread. 3 days after the live stream that had redefined the meaning of going viral, Rebecca sat in Sterling Tech's main conference room for the first time in 2 years. The same polished mahogany table reflected the same breathtaking view of Manhattan's skyline, but the atmosphere was completely transformed from the last time she'd occupied one of these leather chairs. Then, she'd been Jonathan's wife, invited as a courtesy, and expected to contribute charming small talk rather than strategic insights. Today, she was Rebecca Matthews. She'd already begun the legal process of reclaiming her maiden name, and every person in the room understood exactly why they needed her expertise. David Walsh called the emergency meeting to order with the gravity appropriate for a company in crisis. First item on our agenda, the preliminary results from the forensic accounting investigation. Rebecca had spent the previous day working directly with the forensic accountants, walking them through every discrepancy she'd discovered in their joint accounts and corporate records. Her marketing background had trained her to spot patterns and inconsistencies, skills that proved invaluable when applied to financial fraud detection. The scope of Jonathan's theft was breathtaking in its audacity and scope. Over $4.2 million diverted through a complex web of shell companies, fake consulting contracts, and offshore accounts that would have been nearly impossible to detect without insider knowledge. Mrs. Matthews' documentation was absolutely essential to uncovering the full extent of the systematic fraud, the lead forensic accountant reported to the assembled board members. Without her detailed records and analysis, we estimate it would have taken our team 6 to 8 months to piece together the complete picture, assuming we discovered it at all. Rebecca felt the shift in how people looked at her around the polished conference table. Not as Jonathan's wife, not as Jonathan's victim, but as Rebecca Matthews, the woman whose courage and competence had potentially saved Sterling Tech from financial ruin and federal investigation. Thomas Brennan cleared his throat with the formality of someone about to make an official pronouncement. Which brings us to our formal offer, Rebecca. Sterling Tech would like you to return to the company as head of strategic communications and crisis management, reporting directly to the board of directors. The salary figure he mentioned was more than double what she'd earned in her previous position. The comprehensive benefits package included premium childcare services, completely flexible scheduling, equity participation that could make her wealthy in her own right, and the kind of authority she'd never possessed even in her most successful consulting role. I'm genuinely honored by the offer, Rebecca said carefully, her hands resting on her belly, where the baby seemed to be listening to every word. But my primary consideration has to be what's best for my daughter's future. She placed both hands protectively over her unborn child, a gesture that had become her signature in media coverage around the world. Every woman watching the news understood that universal maternal instinct, the way everything else became secondary to protecting your children. Of course, David Walsh said immediately, take whatever time you need for your decision. The offer will remain open indefinitely. After the meeting, Rebecca walked through Sterling Tech's offices with the satisfaction of someone returning home after a long exile. Employees she'd worked with years earlier greeted her with expressions that ranged from respect to outright admiration. The whispers that followed her weren't malicious. They were admiring. That's her, she heard a young assistant say to her colleague. The woman who brought down Jonathan Sterling and saved all our jobs. In the elevator descending to the lobby, a woman she didn't recognize approached with obvious nervousness. Mrs. Matthews, I hope it's okay to interrupt, but I wanted to thank you personally, the woman said, her voice thick with emotion. What you did, the courage you showed. It gave me the strength to report my supervisor for sexual harassment. Because of your example, I found my voice and refused to stay silent. The company investigated and terminated him yesterday. Rebecca's throat tightened with unexpected emotion. I'm so glad you spoke up. Every woman deserves to work without fear. Outside Sterling Tech's gleaming headquarters, the now familiar wall of reporters waited with the dedication of people who understood they were covering a story that would be remembered for years. Rebecca had grown comfortable with their presence, learning to treat media attention as a tool rather than a burden. Any response to your husband's latest statements? A reporter called out. Mr. Sterling's attorney is welcome to make whatever statements they believe serve their client's interests, Rebecca replied diplomatically. I'll continue responding with documented facts rather than legal strategies. Will you be accepting Sterling Tech's offer to return? I'm carefully considering what's best for my family's future. Sterling Tech is an excellent company that was temporarily damaged by one person's criminal choices. They deserve leadership that prioritizes integrity over personal gain. This isn't just about me anymore. This represents every woman who's been told to stay quiet while men destroy the things they help build. That evening, Rebecca received a visitor she hadn't expected. Her doorman announced that Margaret Sterling was in the lobby, requesting permission to come up. Rebecca almost refused automatically. Then curiosity overrode her instinct for self-protection. Send her up, please. Margaret looked like she'd aged a decade in 3 days. Designer clothes that usually appeared flawless now looked rumpled and tired. Makeup couldn't quite hide the dark circles under eyes that had clearly shed tears. She stood in Rebecca's doorway holding a single white envelope like a flag of surrender. I know I'm probably the last person you want to see, Margaret began, her voice lacking its usual imperial authority. Actually, I've been expecting this conversation, Rebecca replied, stepping aside to let her former mother-in-law enter. I'm glad you came. They sat in the living room where Rebecca had planned her live stream, two women who'd navigated the same treacherous man from different perspectives and suffered different types of damage. I wanted to apologize, Margaret said, her voice barely above a whisper. I knew about Sophia from the beginning. I suspected there were financial irregularities. I said nothing because I hoped that protecting the family reputation was more important than protecting you. You hoped I'd stay quiet to preserve the Sterling name, Rebecca said without anger, stating fact rather than accusation. Yes, I was completely wrong, and my silence enabled Jonathan to hurt you in ways that were unforgivable. Margaret's composure cracked completely, revealing the grieving mother underneath the social matriarch. Jonathan has been my only child for 38 years. I enabled his worst behaviors, made excuses for his failures, covered up his mistakes since he was old enough to make them. I created the monster who destroyed your marriage and nearly destroyed the company his grandfather built. Rebecca felt no satisfaction in Margaret's obvious pain, only a deep sadness for the waste of it all. What do you want from me, Margaret? Nothing at all, the older woman replied with surprising directness. I just wanted you to know that what you did took a kind of courage I never possessed, and that baby you're carrying deserves far better grandparents than Jonathan and I could ever be. It wasn't forgiveness that would require time and healing that might never come, but it was acknowledgement, and sometimes that was enough to begin moving forward. A week later, Rebecca signed the final divorce papers with a fountain pen that had belonged to her grandmother, a woman who'd survived the Depression and raised 4 children alone after her husband died in World War II. James Mitchell had negotiated a settlement that awarded her approximately half of Jonathan's remaining assets in complete custody of their unborn daughter. He fought the custody arrangements until the very last moment, James reported with obvious satisfaction. But given the criminal charges, the evidence of financial malfeasance, and your documentation of emotional abuse patterns, the judge was extremely protective of both you and the baby. What about visitation rights? Supervised visits only at your complete discretion, assuming he even wants them once federal sentencing occurs. The judge made it clear that your daughter's safety and emotional well-being take absolute priority over his parental claims. Rebecca signed her new name with bold, confident strokes. Rebecca Matthews. The name felt like putting on clothes that actually fit after years of wearing the wrong size. That evening, she video called Emma, who was handling media relations for Rebecca's rapidly expanding public profile with the enthusiasm of someone who'd discovered her true calling. Pre-orders for the book are absolutely astronomical, Emma reported, her excitement evident even through the laptop screen. Publishers Weekly called it the most anticipated memoir of the decade, and we haven't even finished writing it yet. I still can't believe publishers want to pay me to tell this story. Are you kidding me? You're the woman who live-streamed a corporate takedown while 7 months pregnant and wearing pearls. You're already a legend, and the baby isn't even born yet. Rebecca caught her reflection in the laptop screen and was startled by what she saw. Glowing skin, bright eyes, a genuine smile that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside. She looked happy, truly, genuinely happy for the first time in years. Speaking of which, Emma continued with barely contained excitement, Harvard Business School wants you to guest lecture on corporate whistleblowing and crisis communications. Yale's requesting you for their Women's Leadership Symposium. And about 30 other universities have submitted formal speaking requests. Harvard Business School? Rebecca asked, genuinely amazed. Among many others, you're being invited to speak at conferences, universities, women's organizations worldwide. The woman who chose truth over comfort is in extremely high demand across multiple industries. Rebecca touched her belly where the baby was performing what felt like elaborate gymnastics routines. Soon, very soon, she'd meet this little person who'd already changed her life so completely and irrevocably. What do you think, little one? She murmured softly. Ready to change the world together? The baby's response was a firm kick that made Rebecca laugh out loud with pure joy. 2 weeks after the live stream that had made her internationally famous, Rebecca sat in a television studio across from Leslie Stahl, cameras rolling for what would become one of 60 Minutes' most watched interviews of the decade. 8 months pregnant now, she'd chosen a navy dress that projected both authority and grace while accommodating her changing body. Let's start with that night, Leslie began, with a directness that had made her a legendary journalist. When did you first realize your husband was going to force you to watch his affair? When I received his text message that afternoon, Rebecca replied, her voice carrying a confidence that surprised even her. But I think part of me had been unconsciously preparing for that moment for months without fully realizing it. This wasn't the broken woman who'd sat silently at that dinner table 2 weeks ago. This was someone who'd discovered her own power and had absolutely no intention of surrendering it to anyone ever again. You've been criticized in some quarters for the public nature of your response. Some commentators say you could have handled this privately through traditional legal channels. Rebecca's smile carried hard-earned wisdom that seemed to illuminate the studio. Private handling is exactly what enabled the embezzlement to continue for as long as it did. Jonathan counted on my silence, my privacy, my willingness to protect his reputation at the expense of my own dignity and the financial security of hundreds of employees. Do you have any regrets about that evening? I regret that it took me so long to find the courage to act. I regret that other innocent people were hurt by Jonathan's criminal choices. But I absolutely don't regret choosing transparency over complicity with financial fraud. Rebecca's hand moved instinctively to her belly as the baby shifted position, the gesture captured by cameras and broadcast to millions of viewers. The movement had become iconic, the pregnant woman protecting her unborn child from a world built on lies and corruption. What's next for Rebecca Sterling? Or should I say, Rebecca Matthews? I'm legally reclaiming my maiden name, yes, Rebecca confirmed with obvious satisfaction, and I'm returning to work at Sterling Tech as head of strategic communications and crisis management. It feels absolutely right helping to rebuild something I helped create originally, but doing it properly this time with complete transparency. The interview aired to record viewership numbers that broke network records. Social media exploded with overwhelming support from viewers who saw Rebecca as representing something larger than one woman's divorce. Publishers frantically increased their offers for her book deal. Speaking bureaus called with lucrative opportunities that could establish her as one of the most sought-after corporate speakers in America. But Rebecca's favorite response came from Dr. Moore during her next prenatal appointment, now held under increased security due to her public profile. Everything looks absolutely perfect, Dr. Moore said, studying the ultrasound screen with professional satisfaction. Blood pressure completely normal, baby's growth excellent, all indicators pointing toward a healthy delivery. Whatever you're doing for stress management, it's working beautifully. I'm telling the truth about everything for the first time in years, Rebecca said simply. Apparently, honesty agrees with both of us. At Sterling Tech, Rebecca's first day back felt like a triumphant homecoming rather than a return to work. She'd negotiated for a corner office with a private nursing station for after the baby arrived, completely flexible hours that accommodated her needs as a single mother, and unprecedented authority to rebuild the company's damaged reputation through radical transparency. This is where I belong, not as someone's wife or someone's victim, but as myself. Her first major initiative was a company-wide town hall meeting where she addressed Jonathan's crimes directly, outlined the comprehensive financial recovery plan developed by forensic accountants, and promised that Sterling Tech's future would be built on complete honesty rather than convenient lies. Some of you might wonder how I can work for the company my ex-husband nearly destroyed through his criminal activities, she told the assembled employees, her voice carrying clearly through the packed auditorium. The answer is simple. This was never Jonathan's company. It belongs to all of us. Every person who contributed ideas, effort, innovation, and integrity. And now we are taking it back properly. The applause was thunderous and sustained, lasting nearly 3 minutes as employees stood to show their support. David Walsh found her in her new office afterward, his weathered face beaming with satisfaction. The board is thoroughly impressed with your leadership already. Stock price has stabilized completely. Major clients are staying specifically because of your involvement, and we're attracting new investors who want to be associated with the transparency you represent. Excellent, Rebecca said, reviewing preliminary reports that showed the company's reputation recovering faster than anyone had predicted. We have considerable work ahead of us. About Jonathan's trial, it starts in approximately 6 months. Rebecca looked out her window at Manhattan's skyline, where her ex-husband was somewhere in the city, probably sitting in expensive lawyers' offices and planning strategies that wouldn't work. I'll testify truthfully about everything I witnessed and discovered. Beyond that, justice will follow its natural course. That evening, Rebecca stood in her apartment's nursery, assembling the crib she'd purchased herself from a Swedish furniture store. The room was painted in soft yellows and greens, gender-neutral colors for the baby whose gender she'd decided to keep as a wonderful surprise for birth. Her mother called from Arizona with perfect timing, as mothers often do. I saw the 60 Minutes interview, sweetheart. I'm so incredibly proud of the woman you've become. Thanks, Mom. That means everything to me right now. Your father wants to fly out for the birth, if that's okay with you. Rebecca smiled while arranging tiny clothes in dresser drawers, each garment representing hope for the future. Her parents had never particularly liked Jonathan, though they'd been too polite to express their reservations directly during the marriage. I'd absolutely love that. She's going to need grandparents who love her unconditionally. Rebecca? Her mother's voice carried the weight of years of unspoken concern. You know you can always come home to Arizona if New York becomes too intense with all this attention. Home. Rebecca looked around the nursery she'd decorated with her own hands, the apartment she'd reclaimed as her own space, the city where she'd built and lost and rebuilt her entire life from the ground up. I am home, Mom. Finally, completely home. 3 days later, Rebecca received another unexpected visitor. Margaret Sterling stood in the Sterling Tech lobby looking older and more fragile than Rebecca had ever seen her, but also somehow more genuine than the imperial matriarch she'd always been. Margaret, Rebecca said, her greeting carefully neutral. This is quite unexpected. I wanted to apologize properly and completely, Margaret said, her voice carrying none of its usual commanding authority. I knew about Sophia from the very beginning. I suspected there were financial irregularities. I said nothing because I believed, incorrectly, that protecting the family reputation was more important than protecting you from further harm. One night they sat in Rebecca's office, two women who'd navigated the same manipulative man from different angles and sustained different types of damage. Jonathan has been my only child for 38 years, Margaret continued, with obvious pain. I enabled his worst behaviors from childhood, made excuses for his failures, covered up his mistakes, and generally created the monster who hurt you so badly. I take full responsibility for my role in what happened. Rebecca felt no satisfaction in Margaret's obvious suffering, only a deep sadness for all the wasted years and damaged relationships that could have been prevented with earlier honesty. What do you want from me, Margaret? Nothing at all, the older woman replied with surprising directness. I simply wanted you to know that what you did required a kind of courage I never possessed in my entire life, and that precious baby you're carrying deserves far better grandparents than Jonathan and I could ever be. It wasn't forgiveness. That would require time and healing that might never fully come, but it was genuine acknowledgement of wrongdoing, and sometimes that was enough to begin the difficult process of moving forward. A week later, Rebecca signed the final divorce papers with a fountain pen that had belonged to her grandmother, a woman who'd survived the Great Depression and raised 4 children alone after her husband died in World War II. James Mitchell had negotiated a settlement that awarded her approximately half of Jonathan's remaining liquid assets and complete legal custody of their unborn daughter. He contested the custody arrangements until the very last possible moment, James reported with obvious professional satisfaction. But given the pending criminal charges, the documented evidence of financial crimes, and your comprehensive documentation of emotional abuse patterns, the judge was extremely protective of both you and the baby's interests. What about potential visitation rights? Supervised visits only, entirely at your discretion, and only assuming he even wants them after federal sentencing occurs. The judge made it absolutely clear that your daughter's safety and emotional well-being take complete priority over any parental claims he might make. Rebecca signed her reclaimed name with bold, confident strokes, Rebecca Matthews. The signature felt like putting on clothes that actually fit properly after years of wearing the wrong size. That evening, she video called Emma, who was managing media relations for Rebecca's rapidly expanding public profile, with the enthusiasm of someone who'd discovered her true professional calling. Pre-orders for the book are absolutely astronomical, Emma reported, her excitement evident even through the laptop screen. Publishers Weekly called it the most anticipated memoir of the decade, and several major publications want to excerpt chapters before publication. I still can't quite believe publishers want to pay me substantial money to tell this story. Are you seriously kidding me right now? You're the woman who live-streamed a corporate takedown while 7 months pregnant and wearing your grandmother's pearls. You're already a living legend, and your daughter isn't even born yet. Rebecca caught her reflection in the laptop screen and felt amazed by the transformation she saw. Glowing skin that came from inner peace rather than expensive products. Bright eyes that sparkled with genuine happiness instead of unshed tears. A smile that seemed to emerge from some deep well of contentment she'd forgotten existed. She looked happy, truly, authentically happy for the first time in years. Speaking of legendary status, Emma continued, barely able to contain her excitement, Harvard Business School wants you to deliver their keynote address on corporate ethics and crisis management. Yale's requesting you for their annual Women's Leadership Symposium. And we have formal speaking requests from about 40 other universities worldwide. Harvard wants me to give a keynote address? Rebecca asked, genuinely amazed by how quickly her life was expanding beyond anything she'd imagined possible. Among many, many others, you're being invited to speak at conferences, universities, corporate retreats, women's organizations on 6 continents. The woman who chose truth over comfort is in extraordinary demand across virtually every industry. Rebecca touched her belly where the baby was performing what felt like elaborate acrobatic routines, responding to her mother's excitement with movements that felt almost like applause. "What do you think, little one?" she murmured softly, her voice full of wonder and anticipation. "Ready to help Mama change the world?" The baby's enthusiastic response was a firm kick that made Rebecca laugh out loud with pure, unfiltered joy. Rebecca's water broke at 3:47 in the morning on a Tuesday in late October, exactly 6 weeks after her divorce had been finalized. She was alone in her apartment, but she felt calmer and more prepared than she'd ever imagined possible. This was the moment she'd been consciously preparing for. Not just the birth itself, but the official beginning of their real life together as a family of 2. Her hospital bag had been packed and positioned by the front door for 3 weeks. Emma was on speed dial with backup plans for every possible scenario. Dr. Marmore had been notified according to their carefully rehearsed protocol. Everything was organized, controlled, and prepared, so completely different from the chaos and uncertainty that had characterized her marriage's dramatic end. In the taxi racing through Manhattan's empty pre-dawn streets, contractions building with steadily increasing intensity, Rebecca felt a profound sense of completion rather than ending. The scared, silenced woman she'd been was gone forever, replaced by someone who'd discovered her own strength and learned to use it wisely. "First baby?" the taxi driver asked, noting her remarkably calm demeanor despite the obvious signs of active labor. "Yes, but not my first time starting completely over," Rebecca replied, then laughed at her own unexpected philosophical observation. Labor was intense but straightforward. proceeding exactly as Dr. Moore had predicted based on her excellent health and fitness throughout pregnancy. 12 hours after her water broke, Rebecca held her daughter for the first time. 7 pounds, 3 ounces of perfect pink skin, a cap of dark hair, and the loudest, most indignant cry in the entire maternity ward. "She's absolutely beautiful," Dr. Moore said with the genuine warmth of someone who delivered thousands of babies but still found each birth miraculous. "Have you chosen a name?" Rebecca had wrestled with this decision for months, considering family names that carried too much baggage and contemporary choices that felt trendy rather than substantial. Finally, she'd settled on something that felt completely right for this new life they were building together. "Victoria Matthews," she announced clearly, her voice carrying the same confidence she'd used during her most important presentations. Victory for short. Emma arrived first, carrying an enormous bouquet of sunflowers and tears of pure joy streaming down her face. "She's absolutely perfect, Becca. Completely, utterly perfect." "She really is," Rebecca agreed, unable to stop staring at her daughter's face with the kind of wonder that seemed to make everything else in the world fade into background noise. "I can't believe she's actually mine." Rebecca traced Victoria's tiny fingers with her own, marveling at their perfection and feeling the overwhelming surge of protective love that reorganized every priority and possibility in her life. Every new mother recognized this feeling, the instant transformation from individual to guardian, from self-focused to completely devoted to another person's well-being. Her parents arrived from Arizona the next day, their faces glowing with the special happiness that comes with becoming grandparents. Rebecca's father, usually reserved with his emotions, cried openly when he held his granddaughter for the first time. "She looks exactly like you did at this age," her mother said softly, studying Victoria's features with the intensity of someone memorizing every detail. "Determined, alert, ready to take on the entire world." "She'll need to be strong," Rebecca replied with conviction, adjusting Victoria's tiny hospital blanket. "The world's going to know exactly who she is from the beginning." The media attention was overwhelming, but manageable thanks to James Mitchell's legal expertise and Emma's strategic communication skills. Rebecca had negotiated exclusive rights to announce Victoria's birth through a carefully worded statement that emphasized privacy while acknowledging legitimate public interest. "Rebecca Matthews and daughter Victoria are healthy and resting comfortably. We appreciate the tremendous support we've received from around the world and ask for privacy during this special time as we begin our life together." But it was the personal messages that moved Rebecca most deeply, hundreds of women sharing their own stories of finding courage after seeing her example. Thank you notes from Sterling Tech employees whose jobs she'd saved by exposing the embezzlement. Messages from other single mothers welcoming her to their ranks with advice and encouragement. "I didn't just save myself and my daughter. I helped save other people too." David Walsh sent an elegant arrangement with a card that read, "Sterling Tech's newest board member, perhaps? Give her 18 years to prepare for the position." James Mitchell's gift was characteristically practical. A college fund already seated with $50,000 in a trust structure that would ensure Victoria's financial security regardless of future circumstances. "Every girl should have unlimited options and the resources to pursue them," his accompanying card explained. Margaret Sterling's arrangement was simple but beautiful. White roses with a handwritten card that read, "She deserves everything her father couldn't give her. With love and deep regret, Margaret." Rebecca was surprised to discover that she felt no bitterness toward her former mother-in-law. Margaret had been trapped in her own web of enabling and denial, a prisoner of social expectations and family loyalty that had prevented her from protecting the people who needed protection. Sometimes the prison guards were prisoners too. On their third day in the hospital, Rebecca received an unexpected visitor. Sophia Williams stood hesitantly in the doorway, looking uncertain and hopeful in a way that made her seem much younger than her 26 years. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to see right now," Sophia began tentatively. "Actually, I'm glad you came," Rebecca said with genuine warmth, adjusting Victoria in her arms. "I wanted to thank you personally for providing those financial documents to the prosecutors. They were crucial in ensuring Jonathan received the maximum possible sentence." 15 years, Sophia nodded soberly. "With my plea agreement, I received 2 years probation and 800 hours of community service. That seems completely fair given your cooperation." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching Victoria sleep with the perfect peace that only newborns possess. "She's so beautiful," Sophia said softly, her voice carrying genuine emotion. "She looks completely at peace." "She is at peace," Rebecca replied with quiet satisfaction. "We both are," finally. After Sophia left, Rebecca walked carefully to the window, holding Victoria securely against her chest. The afternoon sun streamed through the glass, warming them both while the city pulsed with its eternal energy 50 floors below. Somewhere in that vast urban landscape, their future was waiting to be discovered and shaped. "This is your kingdom, little princess," Rebecca whispered to her sleeping daughter. "A world where women speak their truth without fear of consequences, where courage matters more than comfort, where your mama learned that sometimes you have to tear everything down completely to build something infinitely better from the ashes." Victoria's response was a tiny sigh of complete contentment that seemed to approve of the world they'd inherit together. The book release was scheduled for Victoria's 6-month birthday. Live streaming Truth, How I Exposed My Husband's Crimes and Found My Voice, had already broken pre-order records at every major retailer. Rebecca's editor called it a masterpiece of personal narrative and social commentary that will influence business ethics discussions for decades. But more importantly, the substantial advance had established Victoria's educational trust fund and provided startup capital for the Matthews Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting women who expose corporate misconduct and need legal or financial assistance during the process. Rebecca knew exactly who she was now, with crystalline clarity, not Jonathan's ex-wife, not a victim of anyone's choices, not even just a mother, though that role brought her immense joy. She was Rebecca Matthews, the woman who'd chosen truth over comfort, justice over convenience, courage over compliance, and her daughter's future over her husband's reputation. Sterling Tech was thriving under new leadership that prioritized transparency and ethical behavior. Rebecca's strategic communications role had evolved into a board position with significant authority. At 32, she was the youngest member of Sterling Tech's board of directors and their most effective spokesperson for the new corporate culture they were building. Victoria's first birthday party was held in Central Park on a perfect spring afternoon, surrounded by the chosen family Rebecca had collected during her transformation. Emma's children played with babies belonging to women who'd reached out after the live stream, creating a community built on shared values of truth and mutual support. "Any regrets about everything that happened?" Emma asked, watching Rebecca chase a wobbling Victoria around the playground equipment designed for toddlers. Rebecca considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Exactly 1 year ago, she'd been married to a millionaire, living in luxury, pregnant with what she'd believed would be the perfect family in their perfect life. Now she was a single mother, working full-time, with a public profile that meant that she'd never have complete privacy again, raising her daughter alone while building a career and a foundation and a completely new life from the ground up. "Not a single one," she said with absolute conviction, her voice carrying the certainty of someone who'd found her truth and intended to live it fully. "Not one regret about any of it." Victoria took her first independent steps that day, walking unsteadily but determinedly from the park bench directly into Rebecca's outstretched arms. Every parent in their group cheered enthusiastically, but Rebecca felt the symbolism most acutely. Her daughter would grow up walking toward truth rather than away from it, toward courage rather than comfort, toward authenticity rather than convenient lies. That evening, alone in their apartment with Victoria sleeping peacefully in her crib, Rebecca opened her laptop and began writing the next chapter. Literally, the sequel was already under contract with her publisher, with an advance that had surprised even James Mitchell. Raising Victory, a single mother's guide to courageous parenting in an uncertain world. But first she had emails to answer, interview requests for the Foundation's official launch next month, speaking engagements at universities and corporations worldwide. A world full of women who needed to hear that their voices mattered, that their truth had value, that courage was always worth the cost. I am not a cautionary tale about what happens when women speak up. I am a victory story about what becomes possible when we refuse to stay silent. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Saw your story on the news tonight. Filing for divorce tomorrow because of your example. Thank you for showing us it's possible to choose ourselves. Rebecca smiled and typed back quickly. It's not just possible, it's absolutely worth every difficult moment. Trust yourself. Victoria stirred in her crib, making the soft sounds that indicated she'd wake soon for her evening bottle. Rebecca closed the laptop and went to collect her daughter, the most important person in her carefully reconstructed world. In the nursery painted in colors of hope and possibility, she rocked Victoria while the city lights twinkled outside their windows like earthbound stars. This was their kingdom now, built on truth, sustained by courage, and filled with infinite possibility for whatever future they chose to create. Ready for tomorrow, princess? Rebecca whispered to her drowsy daughter. Victoria's response was to tighten her grip around Rebecca's finger as if to say, let's conquer the world together, Mama. And Rebecca knew with absolute certainty that they would do exactly that. The baby who'd been conceived during a marriage built on lies would be raised in a life dedicated to truth. The woman who'd found her voice would teach her daughter to use hers fearlessly. The story that had begun with betrayal had transformed into one of triumph, integrity, and unshakable love. Rebecca Matthews and her daughter Victoria were just getting started. The future belonged to women who refused to stay silent, and they intended to claim every bit of it. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you believe in the power of speaking truth, show your support by hitting that like button. Share this with someone who needs to hear that their voice matters. Drop a comment telling us what moment hit you the hardest. And if you want more stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things when it matters most, subscribe and ring that notification bell. Your engagement helps us bring you the stories that need to be told. Remember, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply tell the truth. Retry.